Welcome to the second edition of the Startup Planner. We live in a time where people are more engaged and produce more when they feel connected to an idea. As a startup, you need to foster an environment where your team feels empowered to innovate and expand your vision, when they feel like they have a role in delivering that vision. Culture is the linkage that connects the vision you're trying to achieve to a high-performing team and your business norms to social norms. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Startup Planner. I'm John Duran. Thanks for joining us today, and welcome to the second edition of the Startup Planner.
And I'm Drew McFarland. It's great to be here, and I can't wait to talk about this topic.
So today's topic is going to be covering culture. We believe culture is a critical part to any startup business, actually to any business at this point in time, but it's especially important when you're really trying to extract the most out of the resources, the people, the time that you have available, and culture can help connect you and the people together. So welcome to today's show. We're looking forward to talking about this topic.
Yeah, and this is actually a really timely point to be having this conversation. Very frequently, people will think about corporate culture as being an afterthought with a startup, but as we are actually seeing right now with some of the events that have happened over the last couple of months with Twitter, corporate culture can be a very important thing, and it's going to define your company, and it can also end up hamstringing your company if that corporate culture goes wrong. With what's been happening at Twitter, we have actually seen what John was talking about of a shift from potentially social norms where people were going in, they felt like they were operating for a purpose. They were there working hard for their coworkers. And the moment that there ends up being a widespread shift in terms of how those employees are being treated, they then become 9-to-5 employees. They'll no longer be working the long hours that they don't need to. They're no longer as emotionally invested in the organization. So it's really important for a company to maintain that corporate culture and basically make sure that that gets set in concrete from the beginning days. So one of the things about corporate culture, I've actually done a number of startups and have experienced it from the inside, but John actually brings a really good perspective in terms of how important corporate culture is, because he deals with a lot of different startups all at the same time, and he gets to see which ones end up being successful and which ones don't. So I'd like to start off by asking John a little bit about core values. What's important from a core values standpoint in terms of corporate culture, and why is that important starting off?
So, you're right. It's an interesting viewpoint to be able to see multiple startups at one time, particularly young companies that are trying to get their products rolled out, new companies that are just trying to get an idea, anchored into the ground there. But when it comes to core values, I think every company we know has some list of core values. The most important part, though, is that those aren't just words on a poster. It's really important that they represent how the people act in the organization. And in a startup, it's even more important that they represent how the startup founders act in that organization. Core values have to be second nature. It can't be something that you try to accomplish. Core values are really who you are, and they will be who your company becomes. That's how your company will be perceived. You're going to be judged by that, by the people you interact with, by the employees that you try to hire, by the partners that you work with, etc. As a leader, modeling the core values gives you the ability to really set the tone for your entire business, how things are going to unfold, and how you're going to grow the business. When you have limited resources, as most startups do, limited funding, limited resources, you're just trying to get things going, you'll be asking your team members to wear multiple hats. I mean, I've been through several startups as well, and that's an environment where you do whatever it takes to get the job done every day. A strong, positive culture helps foster that environment where team members can go above and beyond without a feeling abused or even burned out. So my advice is
Yeah.
always lead with your core values. I had a really interesting story during an interview once. I had a candidate that I was interviewing for a position ask me, what would happen if the core value violation happened at the very top of your company? And I have to say, at that point, I was really kind of rocked back in my chair because the company I work for has such a fantastic core values and just overall good company to work for. And I had to really think about that. And I think the question for this person came from the fact that his view had been tainted in the past from things that had shook up a company. And when I dug in a little bit, it was really interesting to find out a core value violation at the top of a company can absolutely destroy it all the way down. That's one of the core
Yeah.
reasons, one of the main reasons that culture is so important to a startup organization.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. One of the nice things about having a really well defined and sort of from top down corporate cultures setup is it makes it easier for everybody to operate in unison. So often when you have an organization and every day people end up running into a circumstance where they have to make a decision about one thing or another. And if the core values for the company are well defined and they don't have to worry about, like what is the right thing to do or what is not the right thing to do, it makes it so that everybody can operate in unison, that everybody's going toward the same direction. And it really ends up being good. The circumstance that you talked about where he, had this, basically a big violation of trust from the leadership of the company that he was in, where they were clearly not operating within their core values. Let's talk a little bit about trust. Why is trust important? Why, how does that end up impacting the organization?
The trust really is probably one of the most powerful core values I see companies have. But it's also a foundational piece for enabling the core values. So sometimes it's written on the poster, sometimes it's not. But at the heart, any startup company and really any company relies on a strength of trust to do business on a day-to-day basis. It becomes the foundation of literally everything you do. In a situation where there's really high trust in the organization, things move faster, things get done faster, and actually at a lower cost because people can collaborate and work together in a more seamless manner. But when trust erodes, when it's not as strong, the speed of doing business slows down, it costs you more to do business. That has a direct impact on just the overall concept of a startup. So trust is critically
Yeah.
important.
Trust actually has a couple of different factors, doesn't it? It's there's not more just one type of trust in this organization. What do you think about that?
No, that's a great call out. It's, there's multiple types of trust from the angle of, I trust you. I trust you. Maybe if I give you money, you'll take care of it. You'll keep it, give it back. You're not going to steal from me. That's more of a personal trust. But equivalent, there's a second type of trust that's really important that we often don't think about, which is the business trust. Do I trust that you're competent to do your job? Do I trust that you're competent to complete the task assigned? Do you have the capabilities and the skill sets needed? That's an aspect of trust as well. And both of these have to work together to actually produce the kind of trust that's needed. You can't have one or the other. You have to have some aspect of both in the people that you work with and that they have to have in you. When there's
Yeah.
trust, conflict becomes nothing but the pursuit of truth, an attempt to find the best possible answer. I get that from Patrick Lencioni from the book The Advantage. And I think that's critically important. Having those trusts, both business and behavioral trust, allows us to work together to actually strive to find the truth behind things so we can move the business forward and not get hung up on difficult discussions, not get hung up on problems that may arise in the organization, etc.
Yeah. I heard at one point in time there's and I'm pulling back from memory here, so if I get this a little bit wrong, understand. But there was a lesson that they teach in the Navy SEALs, where you think about an XY axis. There's job competence. How well are you? How good are you at your job? And then there's trust competence. Like how much do you trust that this person has your back? And now, obviously, you would prefer to have somebody who's highly competent in their job, but also somebody that you trust to have on your back. Unfortunately, there's very few people who have both. What they teach you in the Navy SEALs is it's more important to have somebody who's got your back than it is to have somebody who's highly competent but doesn't have your back. And unfortunately, so often in the business world, it's the exact opposite. People are rewarded for being good at their job, but not necessarily being ethical. And therein lies some of the problems that you end up having with some organizations like this. It is so important for everybody in the organization to, like when you know that your boss, your leadership, the company has your back, that is one less thing that you have to be worried about as you're doing your job. You can focus all of your attention on the task at hand and not have to be worrying about whether or not you have to guard yourself against anything else. Knowing that your leadership has your back is going to make your entire organization operate a little bit better.
Absolutely. And I guess wrapping this back into the whole concept of startup, if you're talking to venture capitalists, they're trying to put their trust in you in the form of a financial investment. So trust goes both ways there as well, and they have to trust, as Bruce described, that you're going to treat their money with respect and use it for the appropriate purposes. You're looking for a business advantage. Organizational health is the greatest advantage you can give to your new startup company. That also comes from Pat Lencioni of the advantage. So if you want to attract the best talent and the most diverse talent, build a culture of trust within your organization so that the folks who are coming and looking for a place to build a career find you and find what they're looking for.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, as I said, if you have an organization where the leadership is trustworthy, where you've got that as a core value that trickles down, it's very powerful. It takes a while to build that. It is very fragile and it is very easy. One mistake, along there can actually fracture that trust, and it will not be an easy thing to repair. But obviously, things happen. There are always going to be some circumstances where things don't operate in an ideal environment. Can you talk to me a little bit about rebuilding trust? Like once you've actually done that, how do you go about rebuilding that trust level?
So rebuilding trust is difficult. I would say that there's a famous little exercise that a lot of companies do from HR that brings such a visual image to rebuilding trust. The concept is take out a sheet of paper, maybe out of your printer or copy machine, a nice pristine sheet of paper. Now wad that piece of paper up completely. After you've got it wadded up, now I want you to take it and smooth it back out as much as possible and look at that piece of paper. Does it look like the original piece of paper? And the answer is no, it's never going to look like that original piece of paper again. And very much that's the way broken trust is. Once trust has been broken, you can repair it, but it's never going to be as strong or as nice as it was to begin with. How do you repair trust? There's a lot of exercises out there. There's a lot of books, a lot of websites that go through a variety of different methods of rebuilding trust. I would say at the basic foundational piece, though, is always going to be start with communication. Communication has to be there before you can rebuild trust, and it's the catalyst that allows that trust building process to proceed going forward.
So we've obviously got a number of people out there who are thinking about starting a company, and they're going through the beginning stages of this. What recommendations would you give to them, and what resources are there to help them on their way of building a good, strong corporate culture?
Well, there's so much, and culture has become over the last few years. Culture has really become more prevalent in the business conversation than in my entire lifetime. As far as resources, two or three of the very best ones I've mentioned several times in this podcast. The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni, absolutely a fantastic book. It explains the power that a good, strong culture can have on an organization, whether you're a startup or a long running organization. Stephen Covey has written several books on the speed of trust and how to rebuild trust, how to use trust. And then there's one I haven't mentioned by Brene Brown called Dare to Lead. And she adds a lot more around the rest of the core values to that story. Talks about things like vulnerability and how that can play into building trust and establishing trust in an organization. So these and numerous other books out there, but those are some of the ones that I usually lean on when I'm talking with companies about their culture.
And one other resource I'll throw in there, just because it's not necessarily about building trust, but it's something that we've referenced a few times during this podcast, is a book called Predictably Irrational, and they talk about the important differences that there are between social norms and business norms, and the advantages that you can have inside of an organization if you've got your workers operating from a social norm standpoint. You get a lot of benefits out of it. It's a fragile, very difficult thing to be able to maintain, but if you can, it will really put a force multiplier on everything that ends up happening inside of your organization. That book is called Predictably Irrational, and it's by Dan Ariely. He's the professor of behavioral economics at MIT. Highly recommend that one as well. Well, this has been a good conversation. Do you have anything else that you'd like to close with, to leave our audience with?
I think the most important thing is if you like what you've heard, please subscribe to our podcast and leave comments in the section below.
Absolutely. And if you know anybody else that's thinking about doing a startup, forward this podcast on to them as well. We're trying to build a community, and we'd really like to start these conversations. And it's the beginning of a new year, and maybe 2023 will be your year to start a new company and new startup. And my name is Drew McFarland.
And I'm John Duran. Thanks for attending the Startup Planner.